lead us now in prayer. I travel down a lonely road and no one seemed to care. The burden on my weary back had bound me to despair. I often complained to Jesus how folks were treating me, and when I heard him say so tenderly, my feet were also weary along the Calvary road. The cross became so heavy, I fell beneath the load. Be faithful, weary pilgrim, the morning I can see. Just lift your cross and follow close with me. Oh Jesus, if I die upon a foreign field someday, 'twould be no more than lucky man's, so less could I repay. No greater love hath mortal man than for a friend to die. These are the words he gently spoke to me. If just a cup of water I place within your hand, then just a cup of water is all that I demand. But if I get to living, they can my glory see. I'll take my cross and follow close to thee.
Our great and almighty Heavenly Father, we come in a blessing to be able to come here this evening, the midweek service, to come here and to hear a lesson from your word, and to sing praises to you, and to be with others Christians, and also to renew our faith and to build up our faith. And Father, we pray that you will be with Brother Edward in the upstairs class as he delivers another lesson from the book of Matthew. May we listen attentively and gain much more knowledge from it. Father, be with the teachers in the other classes as they teach the other children and the older teenagers. May they realize the importance of the work they have to do and the young lives that will impact. And Father, we pray be with the family of Kathy Stafford as they are having to deal with her loss, with her death, and comfort them during this time and the grieving that they have. Be with those also who've not been able to be here because they've had surgery or procedures done. Comfort them, and may they heal quickly and be back with us soon. Watch over us the rest of this evening, the rest of this hour, through the rest of our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
So good to see all of you tonight. We really appreciate your being here and your being a part of our Wednesday night Bible study. Hope you have your Bibles with you. Turn to the book of Matthew, and we'll be studying in Matthew 15. And we appreciate all who have been are here tonight and have been a part of this study almost from its inception, and we hope that it will be helpful to all of us. There have been people who've been talking about my tie and calling me a Christmas tree and all of that. If somebody will just turn my lights on, I'll be all right, I guess. But it's a wonderful time of the year, and hope all of you have a nice period of family get-togethers and all of that. Matthew 15, beginning in verse 21, let's read. Then Jesus went thence and departed into the coasts of Tyre and Zidon. And behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coasts and cried unto him, saying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed with a devil, or demon. But he answered her not a word. And his disciples came and besought him, saying, Send her away, for she crieth after us. But he answered and said, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then came she and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, It is not meet to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs. And she said, Truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered and said, O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. This is an interesting situation. Jesus has been talking and preaching and teaching primarily Jewish people. Now we're told that he goes over into the coasts of Tyre and Zidon. If you've got a Bible that's got a map in it, just look at that map. And you will be looking here at the land of Palestine. The Mediterranean's right over here on the coast. There will be two cities, kindly up in the northern part, Tyre and Sidon. And that is the area where Jesus is headed. If you look a little bit over to your right, you'll see a little tiny blip on a larger map anyway, and that's the Sea of Galilee. He has left the Sea of Galilee and the area around it, Capernaum and several other small towns, and he is traveling westward. And that means he's going into the land of the Gentiles. There were several towns or cities in this area that were heavily populated with Gentiles. There were some Jews living in that area, but they were predominantly Gentile cities. And that's where he is headed. And as he arrives in that area, Mark's account tells us that they go into a house. So they go into a house, and after they enter into the house, this woman comes, and she begins exerting pressure, begging and pleading for the Lord to help her. Now keep in mind, she is described as a Canaanite. The Jews, of course, describe these people as Canaanites. Mark, writing to a Roman audience, calls them Syrophoenicians. They are descendants of the people of Syria and Phoenicia. And they were very vile in their religious practices. And they were known for being pretty, I guess, strong and rough people. We'd call them kind of rough-hewn. I just happened to be reading in connection with another study that I'm doing from the book of 1 Kings and ran across this today. I'd never noticed it before. But when Solomon was building the temple in the Old Testament, the book of 1 Kings tells you about that. I was reading where it says that the Sidonians were great lumberjacks. Now, not in those very words. But it says that they were skilled in timber cutting. Remember, Solomon wanted that cedar wood and cypress wood and so on from that area. And he made a deal with the king of Tyre. I'll pay you so much, I'll supply so many workers if you'll sell me the timber that I want. And the king of Tyre told him, said, we'll cut it, we'll float it down the Mediterranean to wherever you want it, and then, we'll make rafts and float it down there, and then you can get it and bring it inland and use it to build the temple. But I thought that that was interesting. I was studying for tonight's lesson about Tyre and Sidon, and I ran across that statement, and I thought, well, that tells you something about the people in that area. And the Phoenicians were known for their skills as seamen as well, because they were right there on the coast. This woman, as I said, was a Canaanite to the Jewish people. Matthew uses that word. Mark uses the word Syrophoenician because that's the way the Romans would have recognized them. And this woman was a very unlikely follower of Jesus because she was a Gentile. And she was of those people there that had been steeped in paganism for years and years. I believe it was Barry and I were talking the other night. I've forgotten now what we were talking about, but Tyre came up. And I mentioned that a teacher of mine who had done archaeological work in the Holy Lands and knew quite a bit about biblical history and geography and archaeology and things of that nature. I don't know if it was him or some other fellow teacher that mentioned the prophecy that was made concerning Tyre back in the Old Testament about Tyre being cast into the sea. And it seemed unlikely that that would ever happen. But the city of Tyre was destroyed. And then hundreds of years later, it may have been Alexander the Great, who came along, and Tyre had been rebuilt out in the sea. And the king, whoever he was, took the ruins of the old city of Tyre, cast it into the sea, and built what we would call a ramp all the way out to the city and captured the city of Tyre again. But Tyre was cast into the sea, just like the prophet said. Can't remember if it was Isaiah or who that said that, but that just came to mind off the top of my head as we were talking about this. But notice that this woman was a desperate woman. Her desperation grew out of the fact that her daughter was grievously vexed with a devil, the King James says, or a demon. Demon possession was something that took place then, and the way some people are behaving, you wonder if it's still not occurring today. But it seems to me that the demon possession that you read about in the life of Jesus and so on had to do with a huge confrontation between Satan and the Son of God. And there may have been the allowance. Remember, God allowed Satan to do certain things to Job, but he didn't let him do anything he wanted to do. He said, you can take what he has. He took what he had, and then Satan said, well, you know, man will do anything as long as you leave him his life. You know, he'll still serve you as long as his body is not affected. He said, okay, you can vex him with sores and so on, but you can't take his life. He only let him go so far. And I think God still operates that way through his providence. We don't know all there is to know, I'm sure, about demon possession because only God knows that. And he hasn't chosen to reveal all these things to us, but he does show us that the power of Satan could be broken. And we know that the demons spoke to the Lord on one occasion and said, have you come to torment us before the time? They know that they knew their lot was going to be torment, and they knew there would come a time when it would be terrible torment. The devil's going to be cast into the lake that burns with fire and brimstone, won't he? That's what the Bible teaches clearly. And that'll be the lot of all those who serve him. But this woman's daughter was grievously vexed with a demon or by a demon. So she was being tormented. She cried out. You'll notice. She cried out. She was wailing, desiring to get attention. She was desperate. She was demanding attention. And she said, "Have mercy on me," which tells us that what torments our children torment us as well. When our children hurt, we hurt, don't we? That's just the way it is. And, we all probably have been there, done that, but we'd much rather be able to take their hurt and put it on our own person if we could do that. But we can't always do that, can we? But you can imagine the desperation of this woman. But you'll notice what she did. She identified Jesus as Lord, thou Son of David. Can you imagine a Gentile woman saying that? She was saying something that most Gentiles would never utter, considering her pagan background. That is an amazing statement. But what does that tell us? That tells us of the great popularity that Jesus enjoyed among common people, people who were hurting and suffering, and they were poor. I believe it's Mark who tells us the common people heard him gladly because he brought hope to them. Look at how the elite among the Jews felt about him. And I think that that's one of the reasons that this is mentioned, that this section is found in the book of Matthew, written to a Jewish audience primarily. But you get a vivid contrast between the response of the Jewish people, especially their leaders, and the Gentile people. Jesus had been in Jerusalem. He had had visits from the Pharisees and Sadducees from Jerusalem. And generally they came to find fault, to catch him in a trap, ensnare him somehow or the other so they could do away with him, get rid of him. But these other people are flocking to him, to hear him. So Jesus was very, very popular. And it also reveals, I believe, a certain knowledge that some of the Gentiles had of the messianic hope. That is, the hope of the Messiah coming. And so they had maybe had bits and pieces of that presented to them. And they had learned of, this messianic kingdom that is coming. And they too were desperate people. And many of them, no doubt, were very devout. Look at Cornelius, a Gentile, but a very devout man. W.A. Bradfield used to say that Cornelius, before he became a Christian, would put a lot of Christians to shame because he was such a good man. Well, he answered her not a word. Why would he do that? Any of you have any ideas? Because I've wondered about it too. Brenda? He just wanted to keep listening. That's a good point. That's a good point. Anybody else? I found a quote from Warren Wiersbe. Wiersbe's written a kind of a devotional commentary on about every book, I think, of the New Testament. And he emphasizes the word be, what we're supposed to be. But anyway, I found this quote that was attributed to him. He said, Jesus did not respond as he did to destroy her faith, but to develop it. Sometimes Jesus would do things to increase the faith of the one to whom he is speaking. He would say things to them. Now, there's some things that we don't know about this. In what tone of voice did Jesus say what he said to her later? Because it sounded derogatory, sounds derogatory maybe to us. But why was it that he didn't answer her? Was it because he had no respect for womanhood? Well, we know better than that. Was it because he held in contempt Gentiles like many of his Jewish counterparts did? I don't think so. So there had to be some reason, maybe only the Lord knows. Are there any other occasions when he did this? Any of you remember?
I like the woman at the well.
Yeah, a little bit.
You know, he kind of started out trying to reject her, and
A lot of similarities because she was not a full-blooded Gentile, but a Samaritan. She was mixed-blooded. That didn't matter to the Lord. She was a soul, wasn't she? Same thing here. This is a creation of God, the Creator. I looked back. He didn't answer Herod. And some of the things that Pilate said to Jesus, the record says he answered him not. Some of the things that were being said were not to be dignified by an answer, maybe. Sometimes that's, you know, we do things like that today. People sometimes do.
And sometimes the questions they ask is just to lay on trial.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think you're right.
a lot of wisdom in silence.
There is, isn't it? Somebody told me not long ago that, and I may have already repeated this, but I'll use the same excuse I heard another fellow use today. I'm in my 70s. So I have an excuse, I reckon. But he said, silence can be deafening. Silence can be deafening. He had told me about when he lost his wife. Went back home. He said, silence can really be loud. I'd never thought of it that way. But Jesus was silent on occasion, perhaps to give people time to react, respond, to think. Sometimes we humans need that time. Did Jesus know what he was going to do and what was developing? Surely he did, because we know that he knows our thoughts. And he anticipated how people would respond and react in reference to the death of Lazarus and many other events that you study in the New Testament. He knew their thoughts and all of that. His disciples looked upon her crying out and her very presence as an intrusion. They said, send her away. You know, the disciples were good at giving that advice. Have you noticed that? Several times they say, send the people away, Lord. We don't want to be bothered with them. We've had a long, weary day. They did it in reference to the feeding of the 5,000. We'll look a little bit later at the feeding of the 4,000. But Jesus didn't look upon it that way. But they seem to think that this was the logical solution to just about any problem. Just send it away. But that usually doesn't work. Jesus had been sent and had sent his apostles to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He was sent as the Messiah to the Jews. He looked upon his mission as being that which was given him of God, as it was. But he knew too that he would be the Savior of all men, not just Jews. He knew that salvation would be brought to everyone through him. He viewed the lost sheep of the house of Israel as sheep without a shepherd. And he's described in John 10 as being who or whom? The Good Shepherd. He indeed is the Good Shepherd, isn't he? Now, you'll notice a little bit later that it is said, she came and worshiped him. The word worshiped is translated there, worship translates a word there that literally means to come and bow down. And the New American Standard Version renders it that way. She came and bowed down, began to bow down to him. You'll remember that one of the things that is emphasized throughout the Scriptures, someone who isn't deity has no right to accept worship. And Jesus would surely have told this woman, get up, don't worship me, if he had not been deity. Peter refused to be worshiped. The apostles refused to be worshiped. Even an angel in the book of Revelation told John, don't fall down and worship me, worship God. So that angel, though a divine being, was not deity. Didn't have the characteristics of eternalness and all of the attributes of God. But you'll notice in verse 26, chapter 15, verse 26, here is the statement that I mentioned a while ago. He answered and said, it is not meet, that word means suitable. It's not suitable to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs. He comparing this woman to a dog? Well, that's the way all the Jews recognized or thought about the Gentiles. They would refer to them as dogs because they had no reservation about eating anything. Dogs will eat just about anything. The dogs, especially the yard dogs, are scavengers. They'll eat just about anything. Sometimes up in the country, you know, you'll notice a dog, a strange dog around. And you'll think, well, where'd that dog come from? There's usually been a cow or a calf or some type of cattle that have died, or maybe a wild animal. Somebody shot a deer, and that dog has discovered the carcass. And they come to it. They find it somehow or other. And if the vultures don't beat them to it. But the dogs in those days were scavengers. There were street dogs. What was that movie that had the street dogs? As a cartoon. Girls saw it, but I can't remember. She remembers. Yeah, The Lady and the Tramp. That's right. Fancy dog and the street dog. Well, it's interesting because I discovered that the word that is translated dog can refer to either one of those. It can refer to a street dog or a lap dog. How many of you have lap dogs? Oh, I knew some hands would go back or go up back there. Okay, that's the small dogs, the house dogs, you know. They're much more sophisticated than the street dogs. Okay. She has a street dog. I knew I'd get a rise out of some of you people that have your dogs, because I have one too now. It's a grand dog, but it's our dog anyway. It belongs to Barbara, but I take care of her. Okay. But again, Jesus was not being ugly, but he was simply using a term that Jews normally used in reference to Gentiles. But again, I personally believe that he was seeking to draw out her faith for the benefit of others, and maybe to increase. One of the things about faith is it must be persistent. It has a degree of persistence. It's not an accident that that very familiar statement that all of us have heard, and we've quoted it hundreds of times, be thou faithful unto death. Now look at that. What's the root word? It is faith. What does it mean to be faithful? It means to be persistent. You don't give up, you don't quit. You keep on going. You maintain trust in God, belief in Him and His Son, and you keep on going regardless of the odds. Well, what does this woman do? She does exactly that. She's not going to hush. I know that you women sometimes undeservedly get the reputation of talking a lot. There's a lot of men that talk a lot too. But here is a case in point where she needed to keep on talking. A point that I remember being made many years ago was when Abraham and God were talking about Sodom. And Abraham started asking him, will you save it for this many people and this many people? He gets all the way down to 10. Says, peradventure, if 10 souls can be found in those cities that are righteous, will you spare them? And God said, yes, I will. And this teacher said, Abraham, keep on talking. Ask him if he will save the cities for 5. Don't stop now. And then if he will, then ask him if he will save the cities for just 1. Just 1. That's a powerful thought. It really is. It's amazing that Jesus would make this statement, and a little bit later He will use bread to feed 4,000 men, plus women and children. And from all indications, those people would be primarily Gentiles, because He's still in this area. And they're going to be coming out to Him. And He will.
I think that as impressed as the Lord was with this mother's love for her child, and it's always touched the Lord, we know that. He was more impressed by her great faith.
That's right. That's right. Her faith. You'll notice that He compliments her. Do you know how many other people Jesus complimented because of their faith? 1 more. And you know who it was? A Roman centurion, also a Gentile. So far as I know, those are the only 2 people that Jesus ever complimented because of their great faith. And interestingly, they were both Gentiles.
With the centurion, didn't he say, not in all Israel?
What now?
Didn't he tell the centurion, not in all Israel have I found such great
Yeah, I believe that's right. I believe that's right. That's in Matthew chapter 8, only a few chapters back. It seems to me that Jesus is providing a contrast between the Gentiles and Jews, and even His own disciples. If you go back and read the segment just before this one, He sort of chastises Peter, who asked Him, explain this to us. And he said, you mean you don't even understand this? So that tells me that some of His disciples did not measure up and did not have the understanding that they should have had. The persistence and faith of this woman were rewarded because her daughter was healed that very hour, the record says. There's lots of lessons that we could learn from her, but I hope that we'll remember these three. Number one, every soul is precious in the sight of the Lord. It doesn't make any difference who it is, who they are, where they're from, what nationality they are, skin color, race. It doesn't make any difference. Every person is valuable in the sight of the Lord. Let's remember, too, that stereotypes are very dangerous, because a lot of the Jews just thought every Gentile was a dog. They thought Samaritans were. And anybody other than the Jewish people, the leaders especially, felt that way. And the third thing is, let's remember that the gospel is for everybody. It's for everybody. I can't remember the preacher's name, but he said something like this: every person in the world deserves to hear the gospel once before anybody else hears it twice. He was trying to make the point to emphasize how important it is for the gospel to be taken to people of all places. We used to sing a song quite a bit at Baghdad, "The Blessed Gospel is for All." And we've sung it some here over the years too. But that's always been a very thought-provoking song, to me anyway, and I'm sure to others as well. The Canaanite woman, let's remember her and learn a lot of lessons from her. I'm sorry?
The Syrophoenician woman.
Syrophoenician. Let me see. You must be from Syria. A Syrophoenician. Yeah, that's what Mark calls her. But you've been a good audience tonight. Appreciate your participation in class. And anytime you have a question or a comment, please feel free to let it be known. I see some beautiful